to abandon him. Then comes his time in the garden. In some ways, this is his election. It's his last chance to turn back. He takes Peter, James, and John with him to pray, but instead of them providing him with comfort in his anguish, they can't even stay awake. And then the choice made, not my will, but yours be done. The public betrayal of Judas, and the now necessary but no less painful abandonment by his disciples. Next comes Peter's denial. Peter, the one who was listening. Peter, the one who insisted that he should not suffer, speaks those words, I do not know the man. Jesus is now alone with his tormentors. And finally, at the end, when he has endured all the pain, God, his Father, who alone stood by him, also seems absent, also seems to have abandoned him. And he cries, my God, why have you forsaken me? So pushed with Jesus to abandonment, to aloneness, and to the edge of despair, that was my third week. My third week because I think God wanted me to know that he remembered that I had been there before. I had been there without the comfort of knowing that Jesus was there with me too. And now in my third week experience, I could at least know that. The German theologian Jürgen Moltmann was a German soldier during the Second World War. He describes the horror of watching a friend die in front of him just before being captured and eventually interred as a prisoner of war in England. He was not then someone who believed in God. But when volunteers from the Bible Society brought them Bibles, he took one. Then came the day when photographs of the bodies of exterminated Jews appeared on the walls of the prison. At first they thought it must certainly be a hoax, some cruel game being perpetrated on them. But eventually the truth of the horrors that his countrymen had perpetrated sank in. And in his disbelief and despair, he turned to the Bible that he'd been given. And he describes that experience. I read it without much comprehension until I stumbled upon the Psalms of Lament. They were the words of my own heart, and they called my soul to God. Then I came to the story of the Passion. And when I read Jesus' death cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? I knew with certainty, this is someone who understands you. I began to understand the assailed Christ because I felt that he understood me. This was the divine brother in distress, who takes the prisoners with him on his way to the resurrection. I began to sum up the courage to live again, seized by a great hope. He adds later, Christ's God-forsakenness, he explains, showed me where God is, where he had been with me in my life, and where he would be in the future. When I first read Moltmann's story, I couldn't help but remember my experience of the third week. And I began to wonder how many people had similar stories. But what first led me to Moltmann and others was my encounter with the Christology of Hans Urs von Balthasar, kind of a heavy-duty theologian. Von Balthasar, a Jesuit, wrote volumes of huge things, seemed obsessed with the forsakenness of Jesus. That seemed to be his central concern in his Christology, and I was fascinated by this. And I could easily imagine that for him, too, this stemmed at least in part from his experience of the exercises. I've learned that when you read a Jesuit theologian, it seems like the exercises are always lurking in the background somewhere. Maybe his third week was something like mine. For von Balthasar, this aspect of Jesus' experience so important and so central that he takes it further than any theologian that I ever encountered. This is what he says. Being truly forsaken by God always has this definitive quality. There can be no forsakenness for a time or involving room for hope. Other mystics in this situation have felt not only that it will always be like this, but it has always been like this. They experience a kind of eternity of this hell from which no one can deliver them but God himself, and he has disappeared. To read those words and hear those words, it's intriguing to consider that Mother Teresa, in her posthumously published prayer journals, which you may have read, seems to have experienced a very similar sense of abandonment, which she also describes as hell, or a hell. She says, if there is hell, this must be one. How terrible it is to be without God. No prayer, no faith, no love. The only thing that still remains is the conviction that the work is his, that the sisters and brothers are his. As with Moltmann, however, she finds a reason for hope. Hope that the work she's doing belongs to Christ. Something that von Balthasar seems to want to deny us. To the extreme he takes Jesus' forsakenness. And though I think von Balthasar does try to take it too far, and many will tell you that because he wants to go so far as to have Jesus dead among the dead, which even pushes the limits of Catholic orthodoxy. I do understand what he was trying to do, and I think it's very much in the spirit of what Ignatius tries to invite us to in the third week. To meet a Jesus who suffers in every way that we do, even to the point of the greatest of all suffering, complete abandonment even by God. The German Jesuit Alfred Delp, who was imprisoned and executed by the Nazis, he said for no other reason but because he was a Jesuit. They told him that if he left the Jesuits, he would be released. He refused. Alfred Delp writes from his prison cell that he believed that the silence of God was the greatest abandonment of all. But also, interestingly, that it was among many other of what he called wilderness experiences. Experiences, he said, that had a necessary function in life. If you read Alfred Delp and you read Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you see very profound insights into the Christian life, especially in the midst of the evil of World War II. Insights that I think are still very important for us today. This is why Ignatius invites us to imagine that Jesus, though divine, is capable of hiding that divinity even from himself, so that he can enter fully into the human experience and fully into human suffering. I've always found Ignatius' suggestion quite creative. He says, insofar that Jesus was God, basically, he should have the power to hide his divinity from himself. Makes a certain amount of sense. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer is also famous for writing from his Nazi prison cell before his eventual execution, wrote that only the suffering God can help. And so I think that there's definitely something of that in Ignatius' approach to the third week. We have to know that Jesus truly suffers as one of us and with us to fully appreciate the importance of Jesus' suffering for us. And so I think this is also why that Ignatius is adamant that we not rush to the fourth week, which is the resurrection. That we try as much as possible to put that completely out of our minds. And he offers all sorts of ways to do that. Lock yourself in the room, pull down the shades, make it dark, take away any comforts that you have, whatever it takes. He says, I will not admit joyful thoughts, even though they are good and holy, such as those about the resurrection and heavenly glory. Instead, I will try to foster an attitude of sorrow, suffering, and heartbreak. By calling often to memory the labors, fatigue, and sufferings which Christ our Lord has suffered, from his birth up to whatever mystery of his passion I am contemplating at the time. So perhaps not everyone, but many, if not most of us, need to know that in Jesus we have a God who knows what it means to suffer fully as one of us. For many of us, that means the fact that Jesus could know what it feels like when we feel that God is absent from our lives is of great consolation, and perhaps even one of our primary reasons for hope. And to know that he does this for us and with us reveals the depths of his love. So to conclude, I would like to offer one final example, taken from Elizabeth Johnson's book, She Who Is. She's reflecting on those words of Bonhoeffer, only the suffering God can help. And she offers an example from the writings of Margaret Spufford. Closer to the point, says Johnson, is the reflection of another woman who spent endless days and nights on a hospital ward with her tiny, sick daughter, helping the nurses with the other babies when she could. It was a dreadful exposure to the meaningless suffering of the innocent. On those terrible children's wards, she writes, I could neither have worshipped nor respected any God who had not himself cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Because it was so, because the Creator loved his creation enough to become helpless with it and suffer in it, totally overwhelmed by the pain of it, I found there was still hope. This is one way the symbol of a suffering God can help, says Elizabeth Johnson, by signaling that the mystery of God is here in solidarity with those who suffer. Thank you. Are we going to questions? Yeah. So we have time if anybody has some questions or wants to follow up or wants to share something themselves.
I have a question. Yeah. Forsakenness and abandonment, do you see any difference between those two terms?
I think so. I think forsakenness is a more extreme term. Forsakenness brings you maybe closer to the edge of despair. I don't know how we would be able to sort of really make the definitions, but it seems to me that forsakenness is a stronger word for a similar experience.
Mark, in your experience of the third week, did you find yourself identifying with Jesus more than being able to, feel the sorrow and the crying that other people were doing? Is that kind of how it worked out for you? Or?
Yeah, and I really just had this strong sense of Jesus being abandoned. So from the point of view of Jesus, I just saw, his friends falling away, his being alone, He's being misunderstood, and finally, that cry from the cross at the end. Yeah.
When you say that you feel I don't know, cheated, or you didn't get from the third week what you were praying for, or had been told you would receive, or whatever it was, why did you think that other people were getting something you weren't? I mean, did you find that you were comparing yourself to what you saw other people experiencing, or what did you feel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, other people were crying.
I mean,
Yeah.
you just felt that was a reaction you should be having?
Yeah, and I was getting a strong sense from my director that he thought that was the reaction I should be having. And his growing sense of frustration just added to my own. So
Who was your director?
I'm not saying. There's a couple people here that would know, but so maybe you can ask them.
Have you done your second 30-day retreat yet?
I have not. No,
Okay.
I'm getting close to that point. I haven't gotten to that yet.
It'd be interesting to see how the 2 third weeks contrast.
Yes, I'm very interested to see that myself.
You have to be a priest to be able to do the 30-day.
No, anyone can do it. You just have to have the time and the money.
Unless you are a Jesuit.
Yeah, because the cost can be quite a bit. I mean, for an 8-day retreat in most places, it's around $500 now. So for a 30-day retreat, probably be a couple thousand. So it's in some ways cost prohibitive, also, unfortunately.
Is it given somewhere around here?
Yes.
Is that what?
Yeah, Grand Coteau is one of the places. Yeah.
Been doing Grand Coteau and they do them in convent. They do
Yeah,
30
actually, in fact, you could actually even go online, and if you go and just literally put up Jesuit retreat houses in the United States, you'll find a whole series of retreat houses, a web page that's full of places that you can do the 30 days.
I go to memories of the 3 days.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Ignatius knew that a lot of people wouldn't be able to do 30 days. So one of the things he allowed for in the exercises itself was an alternative way of doing the retreat, which we often refer to as the 19th annotation, or the retreat in daily life, where people over a period of perhaps about 30 weeks go through the exercises in their daily life and meet with a director once a week. That's another way to go through the entirety of exercises, and of course in a different way as you're living your life and doing what you do every day. And many people have done that and had very powerful experiences with that.
Let me thank.
Well, I just wanted to say,
question.
if you're really interested in doing it, because I've done the 19th annotation, but I was on sabbatical. I didn't have time, so, but I mean, it took, well, I think it's like a year, but it's an academic year. You started out, my spiritual director, she wanted me to no flow. You're going to go on sabbatical after you do the 19th annotation. I said, okay. And we did. And I think it's a remarkable experience. And, I went to see her once a week, and she gave me material that I was going to pray with for the rest of the week. And then I would come back and talk about what I went through, what was going on, getting all kinds of handouts and what have you. But anyway, and then we discussed that. And so we went through the whole 4 weeks, what Ignatius calls weeks. And I did mine, and I'm very grateful that I did it. And then it does enrich all the other times that I have gone on the little 3-day retreats. It is enrichment. Find yourself a director and get help on it. And I'm sure there's find director.
We have offered it here every 2 years. So we offer it the 19th annotation. So just so you know. Any other final question before we wrap this up? Okay, one last. Yeah.
In trying to dissect your response, I have one comment, that people are neurologically disposed need to be more empathic or less. And so there may be a neurological explanation for why I'm not grateful for that.
Well, I do have a neurological condition, so maybe.
But actually, more to the point, there are really two themes, right? One has to do with empathy with Christ who's suffering, but you noted that he was dying for us. But so that leaves open also the feeling of gratitude for this great gift that we're given. So I wonder if that supplanted the inability to empathize with the suffering.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like somebody suggested maybe the next time I do it, it'll be very different. I was however many years now, like 16 years younger than I am now. So.
You did it 16 years ago?
Yeah.
It's been that long.
Yeah.
When I did my first long retreat, and I've actually done it 4 times now. When I did my first long retreat,
He's hardcore.
I was actually caught in the 3rd week, and in fact, it was so long. I was going through as a novice, and I was going through it as a novice. And my director, I was in a wonderful place in Massachusetts, Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I ended up spending such a long time that I never got to the 4th week. and in the end, he said, well, you can't only go through the passion, you have to then come up and approach the resurrection as well. So that leads into making sure you're all here next week